In the Muffin Read series, I intend to take you on journeys into myths, legends and other fascinating stories from the past in a bite-sized, easy-to-digest, uncomplicated way. Some of these stories you may recognise from the telly or movies, but don't worry, we won't need tens of hours to tell them, and the only special effects needed are those of your own imagination. The first Muffin Reads I've selected, and feel free to suggest future reads, is the Saga of the Volsungs. This is an influential tale, actually a series of connected tales, that has fed into the works of Wagner, Tolkien and many more. If you have jumped into this episode first, please wind back and pick up parts 1 to 4 first, links in the description, and then jump back to continue this fascinating tale. In the previous episodes, we witnessed the tragedy that befell Sigurd, Brynhild, Gunnar and Gudrun. Now Gudrun, in grief and mourning for her lost husband, left her homeland in search of peace. Eventually she came to the hall of King Half, and she stayed there with Thora, daughter of Hakon, for some time, spending her days weaving a tapestry depicting the great deeds of the Volsungs and others. Through this, and her friendship with Thora, Gudrun started to find some peace. But Grimhild found where she was staying. She gathered her sons and asked them if they wished to compensate their sister for the loss of her husband and son. When they agreed, a great expedition was organised, and they set out with 500 men dressed in finest armour and from all parts allied with Gunnar, and eventually they arrived at King Half's hall. Gudrun's brothers approached her and told her of the gifts that they had brought in compensation for her losses, but she could not trust them and turned away from their presentation. But Grimhild had brought a rune-carved drinking horn, within which she had mixed an evil potion of earth and sea and blood. She made Gudrun drink this, and it emptied her mind of her grief. Now, in agreement with her mother and brothers, Gudrun accepted the gifts. Grimhild spoke to her. "You will receive all of the treasures of your father, and then you will be given to King Atli to be his bride. You will claim his wealth and his lands as his wife." "I cannot marry King Atli," replied Gudrun. "It is through his bloodline that I lost the greatest of husbands." "This is no time for revenge, my daughter," said Grimhild. "Atli is powerful. Just pretend, if you must, that Sigurd and Sigmund are still alive." "Sigurd is never far from my thoughts," said Gudrun, "for he was the best of men." Grimhild became insistent. "You will marry King Atli, or you will never marry at all." But Gudrun knew no good would come from the union. "That marriage will only bring grief to our family. He will only bring woe to my brothers, your sons." This balked Grimhild a bit, but she was adamant. "You must marry him. You will be honoured and will be given more land in compensation." "Then it will be fated," Gudrun said. "I will marry King Atli, but you have heard my warnings." And so Gudrun travelled with the entourage of her mother and her brothers by land and by sea to a great palace, where a magnificent banquet was held. King Atli was present at this banquet, and during the celebrations, he and Gudrun were married. It came to be that King Atli started to have dreams which disturbed him. Knowing Gudrun had some ability in interpretation, he spoke to her about them. "I have dreamed that you attacked me with a sword," he said. Gudrun interpreted this as meaning Atli was deceiving himself by thinking he was above all men. "I have also dreamed of 2 reeds, towards which I had a strong desire not to harm, and yet they were still torn up and bled when they were, and then served to me to eat. I dreamed of 2 hawks which flew from my own hand, yet they found no prey, and so were consigned to hell. And then their hearts were mixed with honey for me to eat. Then 2 puppies were set before me, and I was made to kill them and eat them. I dreamed that I lay dying in bed, the result of no natural cause." Your dreams show ill omens for us, said Gudrun. Terrible events are in store for us, and your sons are fated to die. King Atli had wondered about Sigurd's hoard of gold, and where it might be. Of course, King Gunnar and his brother Hogni knew, so he decided to send messengers to them. These messengers, led by Vingi, were to invite the brothers to Atli's halls so that he might discuss his lands and his wealth and how he might pass that inheritance on to Gunnar and his king. Fearing that Atli might be planning to harm her brothers, Gudrun decided to send a warning to them. She prepared runes and tied a wolf's hair around a gold ring to go with them. These she gave to Vingi to pass on to her brothers when they delivered the king's messages. Vingi accepted Gudrun's runes, but a short way into his journey he saw that they were warning Gudrun's brothers against visiting King Atli, and so he changed them to read of encouragement to accept the invitation. When Vingi and his entourage reached the halls of King Gunnar, the brothers received him well. A feast was prepared, with the best drink that Gunnar possessed. Eventually, Vingi stood to deliver his king's message. King Atli sends greetings and gifts, and invites you to his hall to talk of his succession. It is his mind that you, King Gunnar, and you, King Hogni, should be named as heirs. Gunnar and Hogni were surprised by this and counselled each other on the matter. What are we meant to make of this? Asked Gunnar. We have all of the land and treasures we would ever need, and King Atli knows this, yet he offers still more. I'm not sure, replied Hogni, for this isn't like him at all. He has sent us many great gifts, but did you see that gold ring? I am sure that has come from our sister. It is tied with wolf hair. She may be trying to warn us. When the brothers inquired about the ring, Vingi told them that it was indeed part of a message from their sister, and he gave Gudrun's runes, as doctored by himself, to them. Hogni's wife, Kostbera, took the runes so that she might examine them. The feasting continued. Kostbera and Gunnar's wife after Brynhild, Glaumvor, served the kings and the messengers much drink. Gunnar became very drunk, and at the continued urging of Vingi accepted the invitation to Atli's halls to claim his place as his heir. Hogni was not so convinced. You are the eldest, and so your word stands, but I still counsel against this journey. After the feasting had ended, and the men had retired to bed, Kostbera retrieved Gudrun's runes for a better examination. She read them, but she saw that different cuts had been made over the top of an original work, and her wisdom supposed that they must have been altered after Gudrun had made them. In the morning, she told Hogni of her concerns. Anyone with skill at runes can see that these have been changed. Your sister's craft is far better than these. See, either Gudrun has lost her skill, or these have been changed by someone of lesser skill. If you discount the lesser work, you can see the original message underneath. That of your sister's warning you against visiting King Atli, on fear that it will bring you and Gunnar to death. Kostbera continued, with a dream that she had had the night that she'd read Gudrun's runes. A violent river rushed through the hall, breaking its beams. Hogni replied, Your reading is concerning you too much. Atli is a fair king. He will welcome us. Then I dreamed that another river flooded the hall, breaking benches and breaking yours and Gunnar's legs. That, said Hogni, must be referring to the fields of crops we have. When we walk through our fields, sometimes the husks stick to our legs and it makes them look as if they are injured. My third dream was of our bedclothes on fire, burning up from the hall. Hogni responded to this. You dream of our old clothes. We have neglected them and left them around our chambers. It is those that you see burning, not our bed. It's just saying that we should do some tidying. But I had a fourth dream, where a mighty bear came into the hall and destroyed the throne. All of us were taken up in the bear's mouth. That is just indicating a storm, said Hogni. They are usual, and nothing to be afraid of. My fifth and final dream was of an eagle, flying through the hall and splashing us with blood. I believe the eagle represents King Atli, and this carries ill omen for us. Hogni again dismissed his wife's fears. Atli does not mean us harm. When you dream of eagles, it actually means oxen, and we kill a lot of oxen at our hall. And so the conversation ended. But Glaumvor, Gunnar's wife, also had dreams that night. That very same morning, Glaumvor awoke and began to tell Gunnar of her dreams. I dreamed that a bloody sword was carried into the hall. It pierced you, and wolves were howling at both ends of it. But Gunnar replied, That just indicates the barking of little dogs. They like to sound as if they will bite, but they are too small. I had another dream, that a sombre woman entered our chamber and chose you for her husband. I think she could be your Dizzy. This tells me nothing new, Gunnar replied. It would not be surprising if I did not live a long life, and no one can avoid death, whoever they are. And so the brothers set to leave for King Atli's halls, but many tried to persuade them not to go, not the least their wives. Gunnar spoke to Fjornir. Before we leave, fetch the best wine that we have. If this journey means that we will indeed meet our fate, then I would like to have one last drink. He continued, speaking to all around him. If we die, then the old wolf Atli will gain our treasure. But if it comes to it, we will not give up without a fight. Most of the warriors of Gunnar and Hogni were to remain at the halls, but they were accompanied by some of their greatest champions. Hogni's sons, Solar and Snevar, came with them, as did Kosbera's brother, Orkning. They went to their ships, and as they boarded, Glaumvor took Vingi aside. Bad omens form around this journey, she told him. I am not so sure of your goodwill. But Vingi reassured her. I swear to you that all is well. Let me hang, and demons steal my soul if it is otherwise. Kosbera spoke to all of the companions, but especially to her husband. Farewell, and have good fortune, she said, despite her misgivings from her dreams and of the reading of Gudrun's runes. Whatever happens to us, live in happiness, replied Hogni. They pushed their ships hard, breaking oars as they sought to make speed. When they reached land, they did not bother to secure the ships, but pushed on through the forests for King Atli's halls. When they arrived, they found the king's fortress and its men preparing for war. When they approached the stronghold's gate, they found it barred against them. Now, knowing that King Atli had not invited them in peace, Hogni broke down the gates, and the entourage rode in to face the hall proper. Vingi cried out at their breaking through the gates. I invited you courteously in King Atli's name, and yet you immediately attack. You must stay here while I prepare a gallows for your treachery. But the brothers were steadfast. We will not submit to you, said Hogni. If it comes to a fight, we will fight. You cannot frighten us. And with that, they threw Vingi to the ground and beat him to death with the blunt ends of their axes. At the hall, they found King Atli's forces arranged in a battle formation and both sides lined across the courtyard from each other. You are welcome here, called Atli, if you would give up the treasure of Sigurd that now belongs to Gudrun, my wife. That treasure is ours, returned Gunnar, and we are quite prepared to join battle with you should you choose violence to resolve this matter. Angrily, Atli shot back. I have wanted to slay you in battle for a long time, for the deaths of my sister and of Sigurd, and for the gold you hoard from its rightful owner. And so the inevitable battle began. Hearing that fighting had broken out, Gudrun rushed to the scene and went to speak with her brothers. Is there no way to reconcile this? She asked, but the brothers were committed to the fight. Seeing that her husband wielded the stronger army, Gudrun threw her lot in with her brothers, donning a coat of mail and picking up a sword. The battle lasted for many hours, from the early morning to midday. Gunnar and Hogni had cut through Atli's warriors, but had lost many of their own men. The courtyard was awash with the blood of those that lay dead or dying. During a lull in the fighting, Atli called out to the brothers. You have killed many of my relatives. cheated me of my treasure that is rightfully mine by marriage, and plotted the death of my sister. You have no right to this fight." Hogni replied, "You sent false messengers to us and broke the peace first. You have kept our sister badly, and we have refused to listen to her wise advice. You seek to steal treasure that rightfully belongs to our family. It is a joke that you claim righteousness. This battle goes against you, and I am glad." And so it was, and the fighting continued. King Atli urged his warriors to push back against the brothers' army with greater fierceness. But the sons of King Gyuki were fiercer and drove Atli's forces back into his hall. There the fighting became savage, with men on both sides being cut down in pieces. Eventually only Gunnar and Hogni stood from all of their men. Atli's guard seized and fettered Gunnar, but Hogni was not so easily overcome. He killed 20 of the champions that Atli sent to him, hurling many of them to die in the hall's fire. But eventually, even he was subdued and chained. King Atli spoke to his men. "Hogni is a fierce warrior, as you have seen by the number of your comrades he has killed. Now, cut out his heart, and let that be an end to him." "You will not find my heart so easy to take, for even though I am wounded, I can still face your ordeals," Hogni defiantly said. One of Atli's councillors then spoke, saying that perhaps a better blood price would be found with the thrall Hiali. "Hiali is already sentenced to die, so let us spare Hogni and kill him instead." Atli agreed, and then sent his men for Hiali. The thrall cried out in protest and fear, wailing that it should not be his place to pay the blood price for the enmity between kings. His wails grew louder as Atli's men drew their knives and went to end him. But Hogni, hero that he was, halted them with his words. "Grant the thrall his life, if nothing else than to stop his awful wailing. I can play your killing game far better than one such as he." And so, Hiali was released. Gunnar and Hogni were then forced to stand in fetters before Atli. "Where is the treasure of Sigurd?" demanded Atli. "Tell me, if you wish to spare your lives." Gunnar remained defiant. "I would rather see the heart of my brother than tell you that." Angered by this, Atli ordered his men to grab Hiali once more. "Your brother would have given his life to save this worthless one," he said. "But I will show you how worthless your lives all are." And with that, he ordered Hiali's heart to be cut out, and the king held it to Gunnar, and Gunnar said, "See, the heart of a thrall. It quakes now, but less than it did when it was still in that pathetic man." Then Atli ordered his men to cut out Hogni's heart. So strong was Hogni that it took severe effort to do this, and the brother laughed all the way through the deed, as if the wounds and the torture were nothing. When it was done, Atli held Hogni's heart to Gunnar, and Gunnar said, "See the difference? There is no cowardice in Hogni's heart, in or out of his body. Now you have killed my brother, I alone know where the treasure you seek lies, and you have made my mind up for me never to tell you." King Atli yelled in frustration and ordered Gunnar to be taken from his sight. Gudrun then came to Atli. "You have brought misfortune down upon yourself," she told him, "and you will suffer in the same way that you have broken your oaths to Gunnar and me." Unperturbed, King Atli ordered a snake pit to be prepared. Gunnar's hands were bound, and he was thrown in. Gudrun fetched him a harp and placed it in the pit at his feet. This Gunnar played with his toes, so skillfully that many thought it better than the music that they had heard played with fingers. Gunnar's harping caused the snakes in the pit to fall asleep, all except one, an adder, that buried itself into his flesh until it reached his heart and sank its fangs there. And so Gunnar died. After all of these deeds, King Atli said to Gudrun, "We must make our peace with each other, now that your brothers are gone. I will compensate you for their deaths, but know that it was your actions that ultimately brought this all about." "I could tolerate our marriage while my brothers lived," Gudrun replied, "but you can never compensate me for their deaths. But you are my husband, and I no longer have any kin, so I accept my fate. Let us both prepare a great feast in honour of those that have died today." And so a feast was organised, with Atli making preparations for his men and kin that had died during the battle, and Gudrun doing similar for her brothers and their men. She went to the chambers of her sons by Atli and gathered her 2 boys to her. "Terrible strife has come between me and your father," she told them, "and so you must be killed." "If this must happen," the boys replied, "then we cannot stop you. You have the right to do with your children as you see fit, but you will know shame for this act." After they had finished speaking, Gudrun slit their throats and took their bodies. During the feast, King Atli turned to Gudrun and asked where his sons were and why they were not attending. "I will tell you," she said, "because you gave me great grief when you slew my brothers. Your sons are indeed here at the feasting table. You have drunk their blood, mixed with wine from their skulls tonight, and have eaten their hearts, which I had spitted and roasted for you." Atli was beside himself with rage. "You are a monster, to kill your own children in this way, and to feed them to me. This is cruelty beyond any that has been known before. I will have you stoned to death and burned for this deed." But Gudrun remained cold. "You are weak at prophecy. I know how my death will be, and it will not be by your hand. It will be your death that I see first." The 2 exchanged many words of anger and hatred and afterwards parted for different corners of the hall. There Gudrun met with one of Hogni's sons, Niflung, who had come to the hall secretly following the battle. Together they plotted against Atli, and so, when the king had drunk his fill and headed to bed, the pair acted. Gudrun took a sword, and she guided Niflung to King Atli's chamber. Finding him sleeping, the 2 worked together to drive the sword into him. Atli awoke at receiving the wound. Realising that he was mortally injured, he cried out, "Who has done this deed?" At which Gudrun and Niflung came into his sight, and Gudrun told him, "I did, with the son of Hogni." Atli lamented, "There was no honour in this deed. I married you fairly, paying the bride price set by your brothers. It was they that urged me to be your husband, yet you have not repaid this by acting as a good wife. All you have done is coveted the lands of my father." "I do not care about that," replied Gudrun. "I admit I have not had the best temper, but you have made that worse. Your halls are always full of conflict and baiting amongst your families and friends, and that has not helped them either. I was happy with Sigurd. We defeated kings, took their lands, gave portions to the deserving. When a king chose to side with us rather than fight against us, we gave him aid and treasures. But then treachery took him from me, and I ended up here with you. I was married by the greatest king, and in comparison, you are nothing." "And so you have brought me to my death," said Atli. "I would ask one thing of you, that you be a better wife to me in death than you were in my life, and grant me a proper and fitting burial." Gudrun replied, "This I shall do for you. You will be given a fine burial, with your body wrapped in rich cloth and laid to rest in a stone sarcophagus of great craftsmanship." And so appeased, King Atli died from his wounds. Gudrun kept her word. She prepared a great funeral for her husband, and had him wrapped and laid to rest in exactly the manner that she had promised. Then began the task of setting Atli's hall on fire. And when the king's friends and family awoke to the flames, instead of escaping, they attacked each other. With the hall burned to the ground and all of its inhabitants killed, the lives of King Atli and his kin ended. After this deed, Gudrun did not want to live, but her fate had not yet arrived, and so she left the ruined stronghold to face her grim future. Between the death of Sigurd and Gudrun's tragic marriage to King Atli, she had given birth to a daughter who was named Svanhild. She was the fairest of all women, and had inherited her father's eyes such that no one would dare to face her gaze. It was said that she eclipsed all other women in her beauty, just as the sun does to all of the other stars in the heavens. Now, Gudrun, following her burning of King Atli's hall, had given herself to the sea, meaning to drown and end her sorrow, but a great wave lifted her up and carried her out to the lands of King Yonaka, who held much land. Yonaka married Gudrun, and together they had 3 sons, Hamdir, Sorli and Erp. Gudrun also called for Svanhild, and she was raised as one of Yonaka's own. A powerful but old king, Jormunrek, had heard of Svanhild's lineage and beauty. He called his son, Randver, and charged him to travel with his adviser, Biki, to the hall of King Yonaka, to ask for Svanhild's hand in his name, as his age prevented him from making the journey himself in person. So Randver set out on this journey, and eventually came to the hall of King Yonaka. Seeing Svanhild there, both Randver and Biki agreed that she was indeed as beautiful as her reputation had told. Randver spoke to Yonaka. "I have come from my father, King Jormunrek, who would offer himself as ally and kin to you, in exchange for his hand in marriage to your ward, Svanhild, daughter of Sigurd Fafnir's Bane." Yonaka had heard of Jormunrek, and knew him to be both powerful and honourable. He counselled with Gudrun, and although her years of strife and misfortune made her sceptical of good fortune, they both agreed in the end that it would be a beneficent match. So, Svanhild and her followers boarded Randver's ships for the journey back to Jormunrek and the preparations for the marriage. During the voyage, Biki spoke to Randver. "You know, it would be better if a fine young man such as yourself has such a beauty for a bride instead of an old king such as your father." Randver pondered on these words, and throughout the trip he made a great effort to ensure all of his conversations with Svanhild were favourable. When they arrived at King Jormunrek's hall, Biki went to speak with his liege. "It pains me to have to tell you this, my lord," the counsellor began, "but during our voyage your son betrayed you. He has seduced your would-be bride and made her love him." Now, Biki had given bad counsel to Jormunrek in the past, but so enraged was the king by this supposed deed of his son that he called Randver to be punished. "The only fitting punishment, my lord," stated Biki, "would be death by hanging." And so Randver was led to the gallows. But on the way, he caught a hawk and stripped it of its feathers. This he handed to one of the guards as the hangman prepared the noose. On receiving the hawk, Jormunrek immediately regretted his decision to execute his son, for he took the plucked hawk as a sign that Randver thought of him as being without honour, just as the hawk was without feathers. He recanted his hasty call for Randver's death, but by the time he reached the gallows to stop the proceedings, the deed had been done. Urged on by Biki, the hangman had performed his work quickly, and Randver was dead. "All of this tragedy is because of Svanhild, using her beauty to drive daggers of jealousy between you and your son," advised Biki to the king. "You are right," heeded Jormunrek. "Then," said Biki, "she must die without honour." Biki made the arrangements for the execution of Svanhild. She was bound to the entrance gate of Jormunrek's stronghold, and a team of horses was gathered to be driven through the gates over her body. But Svanhild looked upon the horses with the gaze that she had inherited from her father, and they would not move over her. So Biki fetched a sack, tied it over Svanhild's head, and urged the horses forward. And so it was that Svanhild was trampled to her death. On hearing of Svanhild's death, Gudrun went to her sons Hamdir and Sorli. "How can you sit here in peace when your sister has been so shamefully murdered by Jormunrek? You have much to live up to, with the blood of the line of Gunnar and Hogni to uphold. They would have sought revenge as soon as they had heard the news." Hamdir replied to his mother, "You did not care so much for Gunnar and Hogni when they slew Sigurd and left you in a bed soaked in his blood, and yet you killed your own sons in vengeance for them, when they themselves were killed by King Atli. You should not taunt us about all of this, as no good has ever come from your revenge in the past. But, he continued, we cannot stand your continued taunting, so we will do this. Gudrun was pleased with this, and brought good wine to them in large goblets. She then prepared the best armour and weapons that she could provide for them. This armour, she told them, is immune to the piercing of weapons. It will keep you safe from spear and sword, but beware stones. As they departed, Hamdir said to his mother, This will be the last time we see each other. When you hear news from the lands of Jormunrek, you will hold a funeral feast for both us and Svanhild. When they had departed, Gudrun returned to her chambers, where she collapsed, heavy with grief. I have been married to 3 men, she wailed. Sigurd the giant slayer was murdered beside me. Then I was given to King Atli and hated him so much that in my despair I killed our sons and then murdered him. Then I tried to let the sea take me, but it brought me to Jonaka and my 3rd husband instead. I sent my fairest daughter, all I had remaining of Sigurd, to be married, but she instead has been murdered. I have just sent my only remaining sons on a quest that is fated to slay them. Then, her eyes no longer seeing the world, she cried out, Sigurd, you once said that you would wait in hell for me. Come for me, and bring me to you there. And so at last, close to its end, Gudrun leaves our story. Hamdir and Sori first travelled to their brother Erp, as they believed that they would fare better against King Jormunrek together. When they asked for his aid, he told his brothers, I will help you, as the hand helps the hand, and the foot helps the foot. They took this to mean that Erp was refusing to help them, and was instead taunting them, and so they struck him down and slew him. But as they travelled on, Hamdir stumbled and put out his hand to stop his fall. Erp must have been telling the truth, he said, for my hand helped me and stopped me from falling. And further on, Sori stumbled and threw out his foot to brace himself. I agree, he said, for I would have fallen had my foot not braced me and stopped me. And so both brothers came to realise that they had sorely wronged their own brother. Eventually, they arrived at the hall of King Jormunrek. They were brought before the king for an audience, but immediately attacked him. Hamdir slashed with his sword and severed both of Jormunrek's hands from his arms. Sori struck out lower and severed the king's feet from his legs. Again, they bemoaned the loss of their brother. If Erp had been with us, he would have struck high, and Jormunrek's head would now be lying in the dirt. Then the court of Jormunrek attacked the brothers, and they fought back valiantly. The armour Gudrun had provided for them proved true to her word, and no spear or sword harmed them. They killed a great many men. But in the middle of a fight, a tall, ancient, one-eyed man called out across the hall, You show little wisdom, if all of you warriors together cannot defeat these 2 men. Advise us, cried King Jormunrek, still living for the time being in spite of his wounds. Their mail is immune to iron, said the old man, so do not use iron against them. Find stone and use that instead. And so Jormunrek's men found stones, and these they threw at Hamdir and Sori. Before too long, the brothers had been stoned to death. And with the end of Gudrun's last sons, the story and the history of the Volsungs comes to its final, tragic close. And that is our story. Like many Scandinavian tales, it has been one of heroism, of blood, betrayal, tragedy, and death. If you'd like to learn more about the saga of the Volsungs, a good translation and compilation with analysis can be found in the Penguin Classics publication by Jesse L. Bayek. Parts of it also cross into the Poetic Edda and a number of other Scandinavian traditions. An 1877 adaptation of the tale by William Morris under the title The Story of Sigurd, the Volsung and the Fall of the Nibelungs can be found with a simple internet search for it. I hope our little retelling here has provided some interesting entertainment. If so, remember to like, subscribe and turn notifications onto my channel for the next in the series. And take a look around at the rest of my videos to see if there is anything there that strikes your fancy. And until next time.